The drawer was stuck. It had been stuck for as long as anyone at the Millbrook post office could remember, which was saying something, because people who work at small-town post offices tend to remember everything. They remember which families get Christmas cards and which ones don't. They remember who switched from letters to email in 2003 and who still writes checks by hand. They remember the addresses that change when marriages happen and the addresses that go empty when people die. A post office is a library of a town's life, and the people who work there are the librarians. But nobody remembered what was in the bottom drawer of the old sorting desk. The desk had been in the back room of the Millbrook post office since 1971. It was a massive thing, built from oak, with brass handles and a surface scarred by 50 years of rubber stamps and coffee cups, and the casual abuse that government furniture endures when nobody loves it enough to be careful. It had 6 drawers, 5 of which opened smoothly and contained the predictable contents of a postal sorting station: rubber bands, postage scales, forms, stickers, a stapler that hadn't worked since the Clinton administration. The 6th drawer, the bottom one on the left side, was stuck. It had been stuck since at least 1998, according to Margaret Kowalski, who had been the postmaster for 22 years and who had tried to open it once, failed, and moved on with her life because there are only so many battles a person can fight, and a stuck drawer in a post office did not rank among the important ones. But now the desk was being moved. The Millbrook post office was being renovated for the first time in 30 years, and the old sorting desk was being replaced by a new one, a modern thing made of particle board and plastic that would do the same job with less character and less weight and approximately 1/10 the lifespan. The men from the moving company tried to lift the desk and couldn't. It was too heavy. They needed to empty it first, which meant opening all 6 drawers, which meant dealing with the one that was stuck. They pried it open with a flathead screwdriver and a crowbar. The wood cracked. The brass handle came loose. The drawer slid out with a screech that sounded like something being woken up after a very long sleep. Inside the drawer, beneath a layer of dust and a dead spider and a yellowed postal circular from 1986, was a letter, a single letter, white envelope, standard size, hand addressed in blue ink, in handwriting that was neat and careful and slightly slanted to the right, the handwriting of someone who had been taught penmanship in school and who had practiced it and who treated the act of writing a letter as something that mattered. The stamp was a 15-cent stamp, an American flag. The postmark was dated October 14th, 1983, 40 years ago. The return address was a street in Millbrook. The delivery address was a street in Portland, Oregon. The name on the return address was Edward Callahan. The name on the delivery address was Helen Callahan. The letter had never been delivered. For 40 years, it had sat in the bottom drawer of a stuck desk in the back room of a small-town post office in upstate New York, waiting for someone to find it. And now someone had. The someone was a man named Frank Russo. He was 67 years old. He had been a mail carrier in Millbrook for 41 years, and today was his last day. He was retiring, not because he wanted to, because his knees had finally surrendered to 4 decades of walking, and his doctor had told him, in the blunt, unsentimental way that small-town doctors deliver medical advice, that if he didn't stop walking 6 miles a day with a 30-pound bag on his shoulder, his knees would stop working entirely, and then he wouldn't be walking anywhere. Frank was standing in the back room, supervising the move, when the drawer was pried open. He watched the moving men pull out the drawer. He watched them find the letter. And when they held it up, confused, uncertain what to do with a piece of 40-year-old mail, Frank took it from them and looked at it the way a man looks at a message in a bottle, with wonder, with gravity, with the understanding that he was holding something that had been lost and that might, even after all this time, still matter. He knew the name. Edward Callahan. Ed. Everyone in Millbrook over the age of 50 knew Ed Callahan. He had been the high school English teacher for 28 years. He had taught half the town to read and the other half to write, and everyone to think. He was the kind of teacher who made you read books you didn't want to read and then made you glad you had. He was the kind of teacher who stayed after school for 2 hours every day, not because he was required to, but because some kid always needed help, and Ed Callahan could not walk past a kid who needed help. He had died in 2011, lung cancer. He was 73. The funeral had been standing room only. Former students came from all over the country. They told stories. They cried. They said the things that people say about teachers who changed their lives, the things that are cliché because they are true, and that are true because some teachers are simply irreducibly great. A woman named Sarah, who had been in Ed's class in 1989, stood at the podium and told a story about the day Ed had kept her after school and told her she was going to college. Not asked, not suggested, told. She was 15. She was the first person in her family to graduate from high school. College wasn't something people like her did. But Ed looked at her and said, "You're going to college. I don't know how and I don't know where, but you're going, and I'm going to help you get there." He helped her fill out applications. He drove her to campus visits. He wrote her recommendation letters that she said were so compelling that the admissions officers called the school to ask if the student was really as good as the teacher said she was. She went to Smith College on a full scholarship. She was now a professor of English literature at the University of Michigan. Another former student, a man named James, who had been in Ed's class in 1995, told the story of the time Ed had found him crying in the bathroom after school. James was 16. His father had just left. His mother was working 3 jobs. He was failing every class. Ed sat on the bathroom floor with him for an hour, not talking, not lecturing, just sitting there, being present, being the adult who didn't leave. Then he said, "Tomorrow we start over. Every day is a first day in my class." James graduated. He became a social worker. He worked with at-risk youth in Newark. He told the funeral that Ed Callahan was the reason he was alive. Story after story, teacher after teacher, life after changed life. The cumulative weight of a career spent in a classroom, treating every student as if they were the most important person in the world, adding up to something that no salary could measure and no retirement fund could contain. Ed Callahan had been great, and he had written a letter in October 1983 to someone named Helen Callahan in Portland, Oregon, and the letter had never arrived. Frank held the envelope up to the fluorescent light. He could see the shadow of the paper inside, more than 1 page, 2, maybe 3. He could see the density of the handwriting through the envelope, the blue ink showing faintly through the white paper, and he could tell that whatever Ed Callahan had written, he had written a lot of it. Frank's first instinct was to turn it in, to give it to Margaret, the postmaster, who would log it and file it and send it through whatever bureaucratic process existed for undelivered mail that was 4 decades old. That was the protocol. That was the correct, by-the-book, Postal Service-approved course of action. But Frank Russo had not survived 41 years of a mail delivery in a small town by following the book. He had survived by following something older and deeper and more reliable. He had survived by understanding that the mail is not paper. The mail is people. The mail is love letters and birthday cards and divorce papers and medical results and college acceptances and death notices. The mail is the physical manifestation of human connection, and every piece of it, every single piece, represents a moment when one person reached out to another and said, "I have something to tell you." Ed Callahan had something to tell Helen Callahan. He had written it down. He had put it in an envelope. He had addressed it and stamped it and dropped it in a mailbox. And then the post office, his post office, Frank's post office, had failed. The letter had fallen into a drawer that was stuck, and it had stayed there for 40 years. And the thing that Ed Callahan wanted to say had never been said. Frank could not undo 40 years. He could not bring Ed Callahan back from the dead. He could not restore whatever had been lost between the day the letter was written and the day it was found. But he could do one thing, the thing that should have been done in October 1983, the thing that the Postal Service existed to do, the thing that every mail carrier from the moment they put on the uniform and pick up the bag is sworn to do. He could deliver the letter. He put it in his coat pocket. He finished supervising the move. He signed the retirement paperwork that Margaret had prepared, a single page with a signature line and a small, printed "Thank you for your service" at the bottom that felt completely inadequate for 41 years of walking through snow and rain and heat, and the 1,000 small challenges that constitute a career in a profession that most people don't think about until their package is late. The other carriers gathered around. There were 6 of them. 3 had been there almost as long as Frank. The others were younger, hired in the last decade, working in a world where email had replaced letters and Amazon packages had replaced everything else, and the romance of mail delivery had been largely replaced by the reality of hauling boxes up apartment stairs. But they respected Frank. They respected him the way you respect a mountain, not because he was impressive or intimidating, but because he had been there forever, and he was solid, and he knew things about the terrain that nobody else knew. Jim Haggerty, who had been the carrier on the route next to Frank's for 23 years, shook his hand and said, "It won't be the same without you, Frank. It'll be exactly the same, Jim. The route doesn't care who walks it. Maybe not, but the people on the route do." And they did. Frank knew this because over the past 2 weeks, since word of his retirement had spread through the neighborhood, people had been leaving things in their mailboxes for him. Envelopes with thank you notes, gift cards to restaurants, a hand-knitted scarf from Mrs. Chen on Birch Street, a bottle of bourbon from Tom Aldrich on the corner of Main and Prospect, who had been getting his mail from Frank since 1987, and who expressed his emotions exclusively through alcohol and firm handshakes. The gifts sat in a pile on the break room table. 41 years of service, summarized in a pile of envelopes and a bottle of bourbon and a scarf that was slightly too short because Mrs. Chen's arthritis had affected her gauge. Frank looked at the pile. He looked at the letter in his pocket. He looked at the cake with the mailbox that looked like a trash can. He shook hands with his coworkers. He accepted the cake. He smiled. He ate a piece. He said the things you say when you're leaving a place you've been for 4 decades and you're trying not to cry. He hugged Margaret, who was not a hugger and who tolerated it with the stiff, formal awkwardness of a woman who manages a government institution and who considers physical contact to be a deviation from protocol. "You were the best carrier I ever had," Margaret said. "You were the best boss I ever had. I was the only boss you ever had." "Exactly." They both laughed. It was the kind of laugh that happens between people who have known each other for a long time and who understand that humor is the only acceptable form of tenderness in a workplace that smells like rubber bands and ink. Then he got in his car and drove home. The drive home was 7 minutes. Frank had driven it approximately 10,000 times. He could do it with his eyes closed, which was fortunate because his eyes were not entirely functional at the moment. They were wet. They had been wet since he found the letter, and they got wetter when he held it up to the light and saw the shadow of the handwriting, and they hadn't fully dried since. He was not a sentimental man. 41 years of carrying mail had cured him of sentimentality, the way medical school cures doctors of squeamishness. You can't be sentimental when you deliver funeral notices. You can't be sentimental when you bring the envelope from the oncologist's office to the house on Oak Street where the woman with the garden is waiting. And, you know, from the size and weight of the envelope, what it probably says. You learn to carry the mail without carrying the weight of it. You learn to hand someone an envelope that might contain the worst news of their life and walk away with a steady stride and deliver the next one. But this letter was different. This letter had been lost. This letter had sat in the dark for 40 years, inches from the hands that should have carried it, and nobody had known. Not the sender, not the recipient, not any of the postal workers who had walked past that desk every day for 4 decades. Frank Russo had spent his career believing that the mail always gets through. That was the motto, the creed, the article of faith that sustained him through snowstorms and dog bites and the days when his knees screamed and his bag weighed 1,000 pounds and the route seemed to stretch to the horizon. The mail always gets through, except this time it hadn't. And finding out on his last day, holding the evidence of the failure in his hands, felt like a wound. He sat in his kitchen, he put the letter on the table, and he stared at it. Helen Callahan, Portland, Oregon, October 1983. Frank had grown up in Millbrook. He was born here. He went to school here. He married here. He raised his children here. He had been a part of this town for 67 years, and the town had been a part of him, embedded in his identity, the way sediment is embedded in stone. He knew the streets and the houses and the families and the stories and the particular rhythm of a small town where nothing changes quickly, but everything changes eventually. He knew Ed, or rather, he had known Ed, in the way that everyone in Millbrook knew everyone. They had been friendly, but not friends. Ed had been his daughter's English teacher in 11th grade, and Frank remembered going to a parent-teacher conference and sitting across from this thin, intense man who spoke about literature the way other people spoke about religion, with conviction and passion and the absolute certainty that it mattered. Ed had told Frank that his daughter had a gift for writing. Frank had gone home and told her, and she had rolled her eyes because she was 16, and compliments from teachers were embarrassing, but she had kept writing. She was a journalist now at a newspaper in Albany, and Frank had always believed quietly that Ed Callahan had something to do with that. He didn't know if Helen was Ed's wife, his sister, his daughter, his mother, his lover, his friend. He didn't know anything about the relationship between the sender and the recipient, which meant he didn't know anything about what the letter contained or what its absence had meant. He picked up the envelope and felt its weight. Light. Maybe 3 pages. The handwriting was the handwriting of a careful man, a man who chose his words the way a carpenter chooses his wood, with attention, with purpose, with the understanding that what you build from words lasts longer than what you build from anything else. Frank could have opened it. The thought crossed his mind. Not seriously, not with intent. The way a thought crosses your mind when you're standing at the edge of something and you wonder what would happen if you jumped. He would never have opened it. It was federal mail. It was someone's private communication. It was sacred, in the secular sense of the word, the sense that means this belongs to someone else and your curiosity does not entitle you to it. But he wanted to know. God, he wanted to know. What does a man write to a woman in 1983 that sits in a drawer for 40 years and still feels heavy? He called Margaret. He asked her if she knew anything about Helen Callahan. Margaret, who had lived in Millbrook her entire life, and who knew the genealogy of every family in town the way a scholar knows a text, thought for a moment and then said, Helen was Ed's wife. They divorced in 82 or 83. She moved to Oregon. I think she remarried. I haven't heard her name in years. Ed's wife. The letter was from a man to his ex-wife, written 1 year after their divorce, written with care and intention, and sent from Millbrook to Portland and lost in a drawer for 40 years. Frank thanked Margaret. He hung up the phone. He looked at the letter, and he made a decision. He was going to deliver it, not mail it, not put it in the system that had already failed it once. He was going to get in his car and drive to Portland, Oregon, and knock on a door and hand this letter to the woman it was written for. It was insane. Portland was 2,700 miles away. Frank was 67 years old with bad knees and a car that had 140,000 miles on it. He had just retired. He had plans. His wife, Donna, had made plans. A trip to visit their grandchildren in North Carolina. A kitchen renovation, the kind of domestic projects that retired couples use to fill the sudden, terrifying abundance of time. He told Donna. He sat across from her at the kitchen table and explained the situation with the care and precision that 43 years of marriage had taught him was necessary when proposing something that his wife was going to think was crazy. You want to drive to Oregon, Donna said. Not a question, a statement. Spoken with the flat, diagnostic tone of a woman who has been married to a man long enough to recognize when his mind is made up and who is calculating not whether to resist, but how much energy to spend on resistance before accepting the inevitable. I need to deliver this letter, Donna. It's been sitting in that drawer for 40 years. 40 years. That man wrote something to his wife, and the post office lost it, and he died without knowing she never got it. You don't even know if she's still in Portland. I'll find her. You don't know if she's still alive. Then I'll find out. Frank, it's a letter. It's 40 years old. Whatever was in it, whatever he wanted to say, the moment has passed. You can't unpass a moment. Frank looked at his wife. He looked at the letter. He looked at the blue ink showing through the white paper. Maybe not, he said, but I can deliver it. That's my job. That's been my job for 41 years. I deliver things that people write to each other. I don't decide if they're important. I don't decide if they're too late. I just deliver them. Donna looked at him for a long time. She had been looking at him for 43 years, and she knew every expression his face could make. She knew the stubborn one, and the tired one, and the worried one, and the happy one, and the one he wore when he was about to do something that was simultaneously foolish and right. He was wearing that one now. I'm coming with you, she said. They left the next morning. Frank drove. Donna navigated. They took Interstate 90 west through New York, through Pennsylvania, through Ohio, through Indiana, through Illinois, through Iowa, through Nebraska, through Wyoming, through Idaho, through Oregon. 2,700 miles, 4 days, 38 hours of driving, 12 rest stops, 9 gas stations, 6 motels, 2 arguments about directions, 1 flat tire in Nebraska that a man named Carl fixed at a service station in North Platte, while Frank stood in the parking lot and stretched his knees and looked at the sky and wondered what he was doing. He was delivering a letter. That's what he was doing. The same thing he had done every day for 41 years. The only difference was the distance. The first day took them through Pennsylvania and into Ohio. The Allegheny Mountains rose and fell around them, green and gray and streaked with the last colors of autumn. They stopped for lunch at a diner in Youngstown, where the waitress called them Han, and the pie was exceptional, and Frank put the letter on the table between them, and they both looked at it while they ate. "What do you think he wrote?" Donna asked. "I don't know. Take a guess." Frank thought about it. He thought about Ed Callahan, the teacher who stayed after school, the man who spoke about literature like it was religion, the man who had been divorced for a year and who sat down at his desk and picked up a pen and wrote a letter to the woman who had left. "I think he wrote the thing he couldn't say in person," Frank said. "I think he wrote what he should have said when she was standing in front of him and what he was too proud or too scared or too whatever to say out loud." "Most men are," Donna said. Frank looked at her. "Are what? Too proud or too scared or too whatever. That's why letters exist, Frank. Letters exist because men can't say things with their mouths, so they say them with their hands." Frank smiled. It was the first time he had smiled since finding the letter. 43 years of marriage and you're still figuring us out. 43 years and I gave up figuring you out around year 12. I just started enjoying the mystery. The second day took them across the plains. Indiana, Illinois, Iowa. The landscape flattened and opened and stretched to the horizon, and the road went straight for so long that it felt like driving into infinity. The conversation came and went in waves, the way conversation does on long drives, sometimes intense, sometimes silent, sometimes circling back to the same topic that they had been talking about since they left. They talked during the drive, not about the letter, mostly, about their lives, about the years, about the grandchildren and the kitchen renovation and the plans they had made for retirement that were now on hold because Frank was driving across the country to deliver a piece of 40-year-old mail. Frank told Donna about his first day as a mail carrier. August 1982, 102 degrees. The bag weighed 35 pounds. He walked the route in shoes that hadn't been broken in yet and got blisters on both heels that turned into blood blisters by the third house, and that he treated with Band-Aids and stubbornness and the refusal to call in sick on his first day. He told her about the dogs. 22 dog bites in 41 years. The worst one was a German Shepherd on Maple Avenue in 2004 that took a piece out of his calf and required 11 stitches. The owner had been apologetic. The dog had been unrepentant. Frank had continued delivering mail to that house for another 15 years, always carrying a treat in his pocket. And by the end, the German Shepherd, whose name was Bruno, wagged his tail when he saw the mail truck. He told her about the people. Mrs. Delacroix, who was 97 years old and who waited at her mailbox every day because the mail was the only thing that connected her to the outside world. She got 1 letter a week from her sister in Montreal, and Frank made sure to deliver it first on his route because the look on her face when she saw the envelope was worth rearranging his entire schedule for. When Mrs. Delacroix died at 99, Frank attended the funeral and stood in the back and cried, and he felt her absence on the route for months afterward. The empty mailbox, the missing face, the hole in the fabric of his day. But sometimes they talked about Ed Callahan. Frank told Donna what he remembered: the English teacher, the after-school sessions, the funeral. Donna remembered more. She had been closer to Ed and his wife than Frank had. She remembered that the marriage had ended badly, not violently, not dramatically, quietly, the way marriages sometimes end, with a slow leak instead of an explosion, the love draining out so gradually that by the time you notice, the container is empty and you can't remember when it started. They had a son, Donna said. Tommy. He was in our kids' grade. Nice boy. Quiet. He moved away after college. I think he's in Boston. Did Ed ever talk about Helen? After the divorce. Donna thought about it. Not to me. But Carol Miller, who was friends with Ed's sister, said he never got over it. She said he wrote her letters. Lots of them. She said Helen never wrote back. Frank's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Letters. Lots of them. Letters that were sent and received and never answered. Letters that were written and lost and never delivered. A man reaching out across a distance again and again with words on paper and the silence that came back. How many of those letters had been lost? Was this the only one? Or were there others, swallowed by the same stuck drawer, the same broken system, the same failure of a machine that was built to connect people, and that had, in this case, severed the connection completely? He didn't know. He would probably never know. But he had this one letter. These 2 or 3 pages of blue ink on white paper, written by a man who had been dead for 12 years and addressed to a woman who might be dead too. For all Frank knew, he had this one chance to do what should have been done in 1983, and he was going to do it, even if it took 2,700 miles and 4 days and a flat tire in Nebraska. They arrived in Portland on a Thursday afternoon. The city was gray and wet and green, the way Portland always is. A city that wears its weather like a personality, and that smells even in the rain like pine trees and coffee and the particular optimism of a place that has been reinventing itself for decades. The address on the envelope was a street in the southeast part of the city. Frank drove there directly without stopping for food or coffee or the kind of pre-game preparation that you might expect from a man who was about to deliver a 40-year-old letter to a woman he had never met. The house was a craftsman bungalow, blue paint, white trim, a porch with a rocking chair and a wind chime made of seashells, a garden that was tidy and green despite the November gray, with rose bushes along the fence and a Japanese maple in the front yard that had turned the color of fire. Frank parked at the curb. He turned off the engine. He looked at the house. Then he looked at Donna. "What if she's not here?" he said. "Then we'll find her. What if she doesn't want it? Then we'll have driven 2,700 miles for a piece of cake in Nebraska and a flat tire, and that's okay. What if it's bad news? What if the letter says something terrible? What if he wrote it in anger? What if delivering it hurts her?" Donna put her hand on his arm. "Frank, you've been carrying the mail for 41 years. Have you ever not delivered a letter because you were afraid of what was inside?" He hadn't. Not once. In 41 years. Not the letters from the IRS. Not the letters from the hospital. Not the letters with final notice, stamped in red, on the envelope. Not the thin envelopes from colleges that meant rejection, or the thick envelopes that meant acceptance. Not the letters that made people cry or scream or slam the door or fall to their knees. He had delivered them all because that was the job. Because the mail carrier does not judge the mail carrier delivers it. He got out of the car. He walked to the porch. He climbed the steps. He knocked on the door. The woman who opened it was 80 years old. She was small and thin, with silver hair cut short and brown eyes that were sharp and clear behind glasses with tortoiseshell frames. She was wearing a cardigan and slacks and an expression that was curious but not alarmed. The expression of a woman who has lived long enough to know that unexpected visitors are not always unwelcome. "Can I help you?" she said. "Are you Helen Callahan?" Something shifted in her face, not dramatically, a ripple, the kind of movement that happens on the surface of a pond when a stone is dropped from a great height. I'm Helen Mercer now. I haven't been Helen Callahan in 40 years. Frank reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out the letter. He held it in both hands, the way you hold something fragile, something that has survived longer than it should have, and that deserves, at this late stage, to be treated with care. "My name is Frank Russo. I was a mail carrier in Millbrook, New York for 41 years. I retired yesterday, and on my last day, we found this letter in the back of an old desk at the post office. It's been there since 1983. It was never delivered." He held it out to her. "It's from your ex-husband, from Ed." Helen didn't take the letter immediately. She looked at it. She looked at the handwriting. She looked at the 15-cent stamp and the postmark and the address that she hadn't lived at in 40 years, but that she recognized because it was the address of the house where she had started over, the house she had moved to when she left Millbrook and Ed and the life she couldn't sustain. "Ed wrote me a letter." Her voice was quiet, not a whisper. Quieter than a whisper. The voice of a woman who is speaking to herself and doesn't realize anyone else can hear. "Yes, ma'am. In October 1983. a year after I left. Yes, ma'am. Helen reached for the letter. Her hand was steady. She took it from Frank and held it and looked at it and turned it over and ran her finger across the seal, which was still intact, the glue holding after 4 decades of stillness in a dark drawer. I never heard from him, she said. After I left, I waited for months. I waited for a letter or a phone call or something, and nothing came. I thought he didn't care. I thought it was over for him the way it was over for me, and that he had moved on, and that the silence was his answer. She looked at Frank. Her eyes were wet, not crying, not yet, gathering. I waited for this letter for 40 years. Frank stood on the porch and felt the weight of those words settle into his chest. She waited for 40 years. She waited for a letter that was sitting in a drawer 2,700 miles away, waiting to be found, waiting to be delivered, waiting to close a circle that had been open since 1983. Would you like to read it? Frank asked. It was a stupid question. Of course she wanted to read it, but he asked because he needed to say something and because the silence on the porch was so heavy that it needed to be broken. Would you wait? Helen asked. I don't want to be alone when I read it. I don't know why. I just don't. Frank looked at Donna, who was standing at the bottom of the porch steps, her own eyes wet, her hands clutching her purse. We'll wait, Frank said. We drove 2,700 miles to deliver it. We can wait a few more minutes. Helen opened the letter. She opened it carefully, sliding her finger under the seal, lifting the flap with the gentleness of someone opening something that might contain either medicine or poison and who won't know which until they see what's inside. She pulled out the pages, 3 of them, both sides, 6 pages of Ed Callahan's neat, careful, slightly right-slanted handwriting, 6 pages of blue ink on white paper written 40 years ago by a man who was sitting alone in a house in Millbrook, New York, trying to say the thing that he couldn't say when it mattered. Helen read. She read standing on her porch in the gray November light with 2 strangers watching and a wind chime made of seashells singing softly above her head. She read slowly, not because the handwriting was difficult, because every sentence required a pause, a breath, a moment to absorb the impact of words that were written in 1983 and that were landing for the first time in 2023. Frank didn't read the letter. He would never read the letter, but he watched Helen's face as she read it, and her face told him everything he needed to know. The first page made her smile, a small, trembling, half-broken smile that was more memory than expression. Whatever Ed had written on that first page, it took her back to the marriage, to the house, to the life they had shared in Millbrook for 12 years before the distance between them became uncrossable. Frank could see it in her eyes, the traveling, the going backward through time to a place that no longer exists except in the memory of the people who live there. The second page made her cry, not the dramatic cinematic crying that you see in movies, the real kind, the quiet kind, the tears that fall straight down, without sound, without drama, following the lines of a face that has been shaped by 80 years of living and that knows how to carry grief without collapsing under it. She wiped them with the back of her hand, the same hand that held the letter, and the tears fell on the paper and made small, dark spots on the 40-year-old ink. The third page made her close her eyes. She held the letter against her chest, and she closed her eyes, and she stood there, on the porch, with the wind chime and the November gray, and the garden and the Japanese maple, and she held a dead man's words against her heart, and she breathed. In and out, in and out. The breathing of someone who is absorbing an impact. The breathing of someone who has been hit by something that doesn't hurt in the traditional sense, but that changes the shape of everything it touches. She stood like that for a full minute. Frank counted. Donna counted. They both stood there in the gray November air, watching an 80-year-old woman hold a letter against her chest and breathe. And they didn't move, and they didn't speak, because some moments are so complete that any addition to them would be a subtraction. When she opened her eyes, she looked at Frank. He said he was sorry, she said. He said he was wrong. He said the divorce was his fault. He said he was too proud to tell me when I was there and too afraid to call me. After I left, he said he wrote this letter because writing was the only way he knew how to be brave. She paused. He said he loved me, that he never stopped loving me, that he knew he had no right to say it, but that he was saying it anyway, because some things need to be said even when they're too late, especially when they're too late. She looked at the letter, at the blue ink, at the handwriting she hadn't seen in 4 decades, but that she recognized immediately. The way you recognize a voice you haven't heard in years. The way you recognize a face in a crowd. The way you recognize the handwriting of the person you once loved on an envelope that should have arrived 40 years ago. He asked me to write back, Helen said. He gave me his address. He asked me to write back, and I never did, because I never got the letter. And he thought, her voice broke. He thought I didn't want to. She pressed the letter against her chest again. He lived the rest of his life thinking I read this and chose not to respond. He thought my silence was an answer, but it wasn't an answer. It was a stuck drawer. Frank stood on the porch and felt the tears running down his own face. He didn't wipe them away. He was 67 years old, and he had just driven 2,700 miles, and he was standing in front of a woman who had waited 40 years for a letter that he had found on his last day of work. And if there was ever a moment in a man's life when tears were appropriate, this was it. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Mercer," he said. "I'm sorry it took so long. It wasn't your fault. It was the post office's fault, and I am the post office. I've been for 41 years, and I'm sorry." Helen looked at him. She looked at this man who had driven across the country to deliver a letter from a dead man to a woman he had never met. She looked at the scar of decades of weather on his face and the bad knees that had carried him 6 miles a day for 41 years, and the tears that were running unchecked down his cheeks. She looked at him the way you look at someone who has done something that nobody asked them to do and that nobody expected, and that changes nothing and everything at the same time. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for bringing him back to me." She invited them inside. Of course she did. Helen Mercer, née Callahan, was not the kind of woman who lets 2 people stand on her porch crying without offering them coffee and a warm place to sit. They sat in her living room. It was small and warm and filled with the accumulated evidence of a long and full life. Photographs on every surface, books on every shelf, a piano in the corner with sheet music open on the stand. The room of a woman who had lived alone for many years and who had filled the solitude not with emptiness, but with beauty. Helen told them about Ed, not the teacher, the husband, the man behind the classroom door. She told them about meeting him at a college dance in 1963 when he was 25 and she was 22, and he was the only man in the room who asked her about the book she was carrying instead of asking her to dance. She told them about the wedding, a small ceremony at a church in Millbrook with 30 guests and a reception in the church basement and a cake that Ed's mother had baked. And that was, Helen said with a laugh that was still tinged with affection 40 years later, the worst cake she had ever tasted. She told them about the good years, the house they bought on Elm Street, the son they had, Tommy, who was now 51 and who lived in Boston and who was a civil engineer, the dinners they hosted for Ed's students, the summers they spent reading on the porch, the way Ed would stay up until 2 in the morning grading papers and then get up at 6 to make Helen breakfast because he said the most important thing a man could do was make sure the woman he loved started her day with something warm. She told them about the bad years, the distance that grew between them slowly, the way distance always grows, not because of a single catastrophic event, but because of 1,000 small failures of attention, a missed anniversary, a conversation that was interrupted and never resumed, a touch that was offered and not returned, the gradual, almost imperceptible cooling of a relationship that had once been warm and that both of them noticed and neither of them addressed, because addressing it would mean admitting it was happening, and admitting it was happening would mean it was real. She left in 1982. She moved to Portland. She remarried in 1987, a man named Robert Mercer, who was kind and steady and who loved her in the competent, practical way that second husbands love, knowing they are not the first and making peace with it. Robert died in 2015. Helen had been alone since. "I never stopped thinking about Ed," she said. "Not every day. Not the way you think about someone when you're still in love, but regularly, consistently. The way you think about a road you didn't take, a door you didn't open, a letter you never got." She picked up the letter from the coffee table where she had said it. She held it the way she had held it on the porch, against her chest, close to the heart that had been waiting for it. "If I had gotten this letter in 1983, she said, "I would have written back. I would have called him. I would have—" She stopped. She pressed her lips together. She shook her head. but I didn't get it, and he didn't call. And 40 years went by, and now he's gone. The room was quiet. The wind chime outside sang its soft, random melody. The November light came through the windows and fell on the photographs and the books and the piano and the woman with the letter against her heart. But I have it now, Helen said. 40 years late, but I have it now. And that means something. That means he tried. He reached out. He said the things he needed to say. He was brave enough to write them down and put them in an envelope and walk to the mailbox and let them go. She looked at Frank. He didn't fail. The mail failed. He didn't. And knowing that he tried, that changes the story. It doesn't change what happened, but it changes the meaning of what happened. For 40 years, the story of my marriage was that Ed let me go without a word. And now the story is that he didn't. He wrote the word. He wrote the whole letter, and a stuck drawer kept it from me. She paused. A stuck drawer. 40 years of silence because of a stuck drawer. That's either the saddest thing in the world or the funniest. I haven't decided which. Frank and Donna stayed for 3 hours. They drank coffee and ate cookies that Helen produced from a kitchen that was organized with the precision of a woman who lives alone and who has strong opinions about where things belong. They looked at photographs. They heard stories. They laughed at the funny ones and went quiet at the sad ones and sat in the particular, comfortable silence that happens when 3 strangers become, over the course of an afternoon, something more. At some point during the second hour, Helen excused herself and went to the kitchen. Frank could hear her on the phone. She was speaking softly, but the house was small and the walls were thin and the words carried. Tommy, it's Mom. I need to tell you something. Someone found a letter. From your father, from 1983. It was in a post office drawer for 40 years. A mailman just drove from New York to bring it to me. A pause. A long pause. I know. I'm okay. I'm better than okay. I think I'm better than I've been in a long time. Another pause. He said he was sorry, Tommy. He said he loved me. He said a lot of things. Things I wish I'd known. Things I wish you'd known. Helen came back to the living room. Her eyes were red, but her face was calm. The calm that comes after a storm, when the air is clean and everything feels lighter. Tommy is flying out this weekend, she said. He wants to read the letter. He should, Frank said. It's from his father. Ed talked about Tommy in the letter. He said he was proud of him. He said he wished he had been a better father. He said he was going to try harder. Helen's voice cracked on the word try. He did try, she said. After I left, he was a good father to Tommy. Tommy told me. He said Ed showed up to every game, every school event, every important moment. He said Ed called him every Sunday night until the day he died. He tried. He couldn't say it. Not to me, not face to face. He could only write it. She looked at the letter on the coffee table. Men and their letters, she said, and she almost smiled. Donna reached across the couch and took Helen's hand. 2 women who had never met, connected by a letter written by a man they had both known in different ways, sitting in a living room in Portland while the rain did what Portland rain does, which is to say everything, constantly without apology. Can I ask you something? Helen said. Of course, Donna said. Was he happy? At the end, Ed, was he happy? Donna thought about it. She thought about the last time she had seen Ed, which was about a year before he died, at the Christmas bazaar at the Millbrook Community Center. He had been thinner. His hair was gone from the chemo, but he was there, at a folding table, selling used books from the school library to raise money for a scholarship fund he had started. He was talking to a former student, a woman in her 40s, and he was laughing, really laughing. The kind of laugh that makes you wonder what the joke was and whether you missed something good. I think he was, Donna said. Not all the time, not every day, but I think he found a way to be happy. He had his students. He had Tommy. He had the town. He had the work. Did he have someone? A woman? Not that I know of. I think he was still married to you, Helen. In his heart. I think that letter proves it. Helen nodded. She didn't cry. She had used up her tears on the porch. What she did was something quieter. She picked up the letter and she folded it carefully along the original creases and she put it back in the envelope. She held the envelope for a moment. Then she stood up and walked to the bookshelf and placed it between 2 books. What books? Frank asked, because he was a man who noticed details and because the detail felt important. Helen looked at the shelf. She smiled. The first full, unguarded, genuinely warm smile Frank had seen on her face. The Great Gatsby, and To Kill a Mockingbird. They were Ed's favorite books. He used to teach them every year. He said every person in America should read both of them before they turned 18. She touched the spine of the envelope, nestled between the two novels. Now he's between them, where he belongs. When they left, Helen walked them to the door. She hugged Donna. She hugged Frank. She held on to Frank for a long time with the firm, deliberate grip of a woman who is not sentimental, but who recognizes, when it appears, a moment that deserves to be marked. "You drove 2,700 miles to deliver a letter," she said. "Yes, ma'am. On your first day of retirement." "Yes, ma'am. Your wife must be a saint." Donna, standing behind Frank, said, "I'm not a saint. I'm a woman who's been married to a mailman for 43 years. I knew what I was signing up for." Helen laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes from the belly and fills the room and makes you feel like the world is a place where good things can still happen, even when they happen 40 years too late. "Come back anytime," Helen said. "Both of you. The door is always open." Frank and Donna drove home. They took the same route in reverse. 2,700 miles, 4 days. The flat tire in Nebraska had been fixed. The motels were the same. The highway was the same. But Frank was different. Something had shifted inside him during the drive home. A recalibration of something fundamental. The way a clock is reset, or a compass is reoriented, or a life is redefined by a single act that reveals what it was always about. He had been a mail carrier for 41 years. He had delivered hundreds of thousands of pieces of mail, letters and packages and postcards and bills, and the endless, mundane, essential stream of paper that connects one human being to another. He had done it in snow and rain and heat. He had done it with bad knees and a heavy bag and a uniform that was never quite warm enough in winter and never quite cool enough in summer. He had done it because it was his job, and because the job mattered, and because the mail, every single piece of it, was a thread in the fabric that holds people together. And on his last day, in a stuck drawer, in the back room of a small-town post office, he had found the one piece that mattered most. The one letter that had been waiting longest, the one message that a dead man had written to a living woman, and that the universe, or God, or fate, or the simple mechanics of a stuck drawer had kept hidden for 40 years until the right person found it. Frank Russo, mail carrier, 41 years of service, retired, final delivery, one letter, white envelope, blue ink, 15-cent stamp, postmarked October 14th, 1983. Delivered November 16th, 2023, 40 years late, but delivered. He got home on a Monday. He walked into the kitchen. He put his keys on the counter. He sat down at the table. He looked at the spot where the letter had been, the spot where he had stared at it, and decided to drive 2,700 miles to deliver it. Donna came in behind him. She put her hand on his shoulder. "What now?" she said. Frank thought about it. He thought about the highway and the motels and the flat tire and Helen's face when she read the letter and the wind chime on the porch and the words that Ed Callahan had written 40 years ago, and that had finally reached the person they were meant for. "I think I'll make you breakfast," he said. Ed was right. The most important thing a man can do is make sure the woman he loves starts her day with something warm. Donna smiled. She kissed the top of his head. She sat down at the table, and Frank Russo, retired mail carrier, 41 years of service, final delivery complete, got up and made his wife breakfast. Eggs and toast and coffee and the quiet, unremarkable, magnificent love of two people who have been together for 43 years and who understand that the most important things in life are not grand gestures or dramatic revelations or letters that arrive 40 years late. The most important things are the ones that arrive on time, every day, without fail, without fanfare, without anyone noticing, like breakfast, like a hand on a shoulder, like the words that Ed Callahan wrote, and that Helen Callahan finally read, and that Frank Russo carried across the country because someone had to, because that's the job, because the mail always gets delivered, even when it takes 40 years. Even then,